Yahoo Finance, this is Electionomics. I'm Rick Newman.
And I'm Alexis Christoforous. And in this week's podcast, we are taking a closer look at the impeachment process and how it may play into the 2020 election for President Trump.
The whole thing pretty much played out really according to script, if you think about it. So the House impeached Trump, the Senate declined to convict. That is basically what everybody said was going to happen. There was some drama along the way. Is the Senate going to call witnesses? How are 3 or 4 Republicans going to vote? Is there going to be any break in party unity in support of Trump? But at the end of the day, Trump survives and he goes on as president. So the real question to me is, hold on.
We have an interesting setup here today. Oh my gosh, you have a cutout. You've really upped your game, Rick.
Is Trump larger than life?
In this thing he is.
Or is he not?
I love I thought you were going to go to
or is he small?
Here.
Or is he small and trivial? So there were some interesting poll results that came out during the impeachment process and the Senate trial, and those. One of them that we heard a lot was that 75% of all voters of all parties felt the Senate should have called witnesses, and the Senate did not call witnesses. And the central focus there, of course, was John Bolton, the former national security advisor. So that suggests that most voters feel like the Senate did not do as thorough a job as it could have done or should have done. So will that matter in November? Don't know. Another very interesting finding was that I think in the last poll I saw, I think 47% of voters said Trump should be removed from office. That seems extraordinarily high just in general. 48% or so, let's call it the same amount, said Trump should not be removed from office. So, and then the rest didn't know.
But do we know if those people were saying that along party lines?
Yeah, of course. Of course they were. But as we've talked about many times, the voters who matter here really are not so much Republicans or Democrats, but people who are in the middle and may not be sure what to make of all this. And then one last thing that has come just recently is in Gallup's poll of presidential approval, Trump has now hit 49%, which is the highest level he's hit in that Gallup poll.
Isn't that ironic?
I don't really know what to make of that. So when you've got almost half the country thinks Trump should be removed from office, and yet his approval rating hits the highest level of his presidency at roughly the same time. Now, it's not like his approval rating is exploding to 60 or 65%, but it is a meaningful bump over where he's been. So did he get a bump from the impeachment drama? It's possible.
Or maybe can we just not put a lot of stock in these polls
that might be the case too.
Back in the 2016 election. But in addition to impeachment, which he's had to deal with, do you think that it's going to come up in the debates? I mean, when we finally know who President Trump will debate, will that Democratic opponent bring up the fact that they never had an opportunity to bring in witnesses?
So you're assuming there will be a Democratic nominee at some point?
I actually
So as we sit here, we don't know what the results are in Iowa, and the candidates have moved on to New Hampshire, and then they'll move on to Nevada and South Carolina. I think that it makes sense that if you are whoever the Democratic nominee turns out to be, sure, you would want to raise the allegations that came out of the impeachment. It's basically corruption, that Trump is corrupt, that he cheated, that he needed to shake down a foreign government to help with an investigation of Joe Biden. Especially if you're Joe Biden, Biden has talked about this, and if he's the nominee, you have heard him saying Trump is apparently so worried about me that he had to go do this shakedown over in Ukraine. Of course, if you're Joe Biden, that also brings up the thing Trump was looking for, which is what's up with Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son.
Lawmaker actually come out and say, it might have been a California lawmaker, said that if Joe Biden is in office, he should be impeached because he did nothing with the Ukraine situation while VP.
Sure, and there's no shortage of outlandish allegations or statements by Republicans and Democrats alike here. So I would think that the Democratic nominee would really have to be doing intensive polling and focus groups and things like that to find out, will impeachment and bringing up impeachment, and Trump is the well, I mean, he's not the only, he's not, he's the second, I guess he's the third president to be impeached and survive as president, right? Because there was Bill Clinton and then there was Andrew Johnson.
And that's right. And Nixon, of course, resigned before he could be impeached.
Yeah, so he didn't survive. So Nixon did not survive, Clinton did survive, and Trump has survived. So
or will it backfire on them? Is that what you're saying?
How does this work with voters? I mean, and again, it's not how it works with all voters. You have to narrow this down. Are there
select group of swing voters?
The swing voters in the swing states, which is going to be a relatively small portion of voters.
Well, let's talk about those swing voters in those swing states, because those are states that are affected by largely manufacturing, by the farm industry, and all of the states are affected by the unemployment picture. And right now, the unemployment picture is very, very good. Do those things offset at the time people are going into the polls? Is that going to offset impeachment and almost anything else that's happened during his presidency?
It's a great question, as we've discussed before. I just don't know. This really matters because if you're the Democrat, what do you campaign on? And by the way, so the
without
where do we
looking
sit
like
right
you're
now?
just
So it's
trying to
February.
be
So it's February.
right.
So basically, the election's in 9 months. Will voters care about impeachment in 9 months? Some voters don't care about it now. A lot of those are Trump supporters, but again, the independents and the leaning one way or leaning the other way voters, will they care? I think we'll talk about the economy in a minute, but I think one of the biggest factors in the election is still going to be wild cards that could develop during the next 9 months.
Okay, let's break down some of what those.
So
wild
we did a
cards might be.
podcast on some of those wild cards, and I think one of those we identified is still as relevant as it was then, if not more so, which is John Bolton. So we had this big debate in Washington about should John Bolton testify. So for people who don't know the background, John Bolton has a book coming out. And we've known that's not news. We knew this is coming, but according to news reports from people who have seen a draft of the book, John Bolton does say Trump had direct knowledge and direct involvement of what was going on in Ukraine. And this undercuts one of Trump's defenses, which is there was never a witness with firsthand direct knowledge. Well, John Bolton, the former national security advisor, says he did have firsthand direct knowledge.
And he wanted to be a witness.
And now the White House
trial.
That's right. And he said he would testify if subpoenaed. And of course, the Senate did not subpoena him. There are all kinds of questions around this, like why doesn't the House subpoena him? They can subpoena him for any reason. I mean, they could easily come up with a reason. They may still do that. Maybe they didn't want to do that.
Maybe there's your wild card.
Well, I think that's a wild card no matter what. So the White House is actually trying to kill this book, prevent it from being published. That's a really interesting. I mean, if it actually goes that far, so there's a legal battle over whether this book gets published. I can't imagine that the government would actually be able to prevent the publisher from publishing this book.
Well, does that not smack the freedom of speech amendment right in the face?
Right.
In an election year.
And the claim is going to be that it contains classified information. Well, the counterclaim is very easy, which is, well, it's not classified, and we can demonstrate that it's not classified. This gets into gamesmanship. Like you can sort of classify information after the fact. You can take something that's not classified, and the president has classification authority, so he can say,
he can run
"Oh, I
classify
declare
the
this
information."
classified."
Right.
And
But then how does that play out with voters?
It depends.
Do they say, well, then what are you so afraid of?
So this fight doesn't matter. The fight over John Bolton's book does not matter a whit to voters. If it gets published, and I'm going to say 85% likelihood this book gets published. I think it's 100% likelihood it gets published. I think it's possible that if the White House really tries to do this, they could delay publication just through legal battles. So because you go to court to block it, it takes time, then it has to be appealed and so forth. So I guess there's a chance they could delay the publication of this book. But John Bolton could just come out and do an interview. All he has to do is stand in front of a podium and say what he knows. So I think it's highly likely that whatever John Bolton has to say, he's going to say it. And then does that change anything? Again, when we're talking about 2% of voters, 3% of voters, if John Bolton says, I think President Trump is a crook, I think that would change things because he's a conservative fixture. He's never done anything favorable to Democrats on purpose. And if he really came out and condemned President Trump, sure, there could be some people saying, wow, that sounds really authoritative from a guy who ought to know. Maybe I should think about
So
that
some of
when I
those
vote.
swing voters who might lean conservative and who might lean
Yes.
Republican may actually lean the
I
other
think
way.
so. Then you have the other problem for Democrats, which is they are always looking for some savior figure. And first it was Michael Cohen, the president's lawyer, who turned on President Trump, and they said, "Oh, Michael Cohen is going to bring Trump down," and he didn't. He incriminated him, but he didn't bring him down. Didn't really budge in the polls. Then it was going to be Robert Mueller was going to bring Trump down. Robert Mueller didn't quite do that. Trump didn't really budge in the polls, and now you can see Democrats, like they have their savior fixation is now shifted to John Bolton. Oh, John Bolton's going to bring Trump down. I feel it's going to be like
really
Michael Cohen and Robert Mueller all over again, which
and
is he
time.
could just, at the the final outcome with John Bolton could be he says something kind of wishy-washy that just reinforces what we already know without really punctuating it for voters. And, as we've discussed before, the thing that
He
Democrats
just seems like a
did not...
Teflon president. I mean, we've talked about this time and time again.
He does, but that doesn't mean he's going to get reelected. It means there hasn't been anything severe enough to actually bounce him from office. But getting reelected
Not even
is a different
impeachment,
thing.
and
Yeah.
one might think that's pretty severe.
You know what I think the Democrats just did not get out of impeachment? They never got a crystallizing moment that was a video. It has to be a video. It has to be something that Democrats can play in campaign ads and things like that.
And on social media.
That just in whatever intangible way really crystallizes in voters' minds that this guy is a crook. I think I went back and looked at the Nixon impeachment because I was interested. How was the economy doing anyway back during the Nixon impeachment, and could that have played a factor then, and could it be playing a factor now? The economy back then actually had just entered a recession in the summer of 1974, or the first half of 1974, and Nixon, of course, left in August of 1974, and the economy was actually doing fairly bad back then. But in the summer of 1974, before the Supreme Court said the White House has to turn over these tapes, there was the big revelation that Nixon had been recording all these conversations, and then the tapes themselves were the thing that really incriminated Nixon, and that's basically when he left. Leading up to that, the public was split about Nixon's impeachment, much as it was split about Trump's impeachment. So there were polls that showed about an equal split among people who said, yes, this is criminal and the president should be removed from office, and people said, no, it's overblown. Washington should just get back to business as usual and stop with this impeachment stuff. So it's not as if there was this overwhelming public opinion that Nixon had to go. And the reason Nixon actually he fought impeachment the whole way, and the only reason he ultimately left office was when Republicans on Capitol Hill said, you know what, so the House did impeach him, and then Republicans said, you know what, you are losing the support of your party, and we cannot defend you now that we know what was in these tapes that have just come out.
So you're saying there wasn't a moment like that in the Trump
There
impeachment?
never was a moment that undercut Trump's support in the Republican Party. So we have seen, we've had some condemnations from people like Senator Lisa Murkowski, and Lamar Alexander said, oh, he never should have done this, but I don't think it's impeachable. But they're not voting against him. They're
Right.
just verbally condemning him. And in the cases where they're doing that, it's almost always because, Lamar Alexander's not running for re-election, so I guess maybe you could say he's just speaking his mind. But most of what the senators are saying about impeachment, whether it was during the trial or afterward, it just in comments to the press or supporters or whoever. They're saying that for their local voters. So they will say whatever they think their voters back home want to hear. So if they know that their voters are kind of troubled in wherever, Kentucky, Alaska, whatever, Tennessee, whatever your state, if they know their voters are kind of troubled by what Trump did, that's what they're going to sound like. And if their voters are just with Trump all the way, that's what they're going to sound like. But nothing ever cracked Trump's support on impeachment, which is say against impeachment in the Republican Party.
You know, some of the other wild cards we've talked about in the past really aren't wild cards anymore. We had the Iran missile attacks. That seems to have now
Well,
died down.
I'm going to disagree with that
Okay.
because I don't think that's necessarily over. We had the overt, we took a shot, they took a shot. That played out according to script. A lot of Iran analysts and people familiar with the region think I don't want to say anything could happen. I shouldn't say that, but Iran's not done, and what they may be planning something that is a covert attack. It could be a terrorist attack. It for sure would probably be something not immediately traceable to Iran. I mean, we've seen them do this before, so they might. Who knows? It could be targeting U.S. military assets in the Gulf. It could be some kind of attack on an embassy nowhere near the Middle East. They've done that before. So I don't think that's over, and I think we need to be very vigilant about something there. But you're right in terms of the theatrics of that played out in early January. I think it was. That has died down for now, yeah.
And certainly the trade war with China. We do have that phase one trade deal, although it does have its critics, right? It doesn't seem to be as alarming as it was just a few short weeks ago.
Yes, and another thing about that, I mean, as the two sides were negotiating that, I was thinking that, that got finalized while the impeachment process was underway here.
In fact, the day they were having the vote in the House was the day that the president was signing the phase one trade deal, and a lot of the news organizations had a split screen up of the vote in the House and then President Trump touting this deal.
And I was thinking along the way that, and others were too, that the fact that Trump was going through this impeachment process here at home probably weakened his hand in the negotiations, because the other side, the Chinese, could see he's got a very weak position at home. I mean, he's kind of holding on to office by a thread, which he really was at the time. We didn't know what revelations were going to come out of the impeachment process, and the ones that did come out were actually pretty damning.
You know what? I think you just gave the Democrats a talking point in their debate when they finally meet Trump.
I'll have to give the Republicans one then too to
yes,
keep it even.
To stay fair and balanced. Yes, absolutely.
So we still don't know, by the way, what is in the phase one trade deal. We know we've had the bullet points, but we still have not seen everything in there.
They do touch on
it's
intellectual
totally
property.
Uncertain how it's going to play out. And you're now hearing administration people kind of say, well, it's going to be phased in, all these giant purchases of U.S. agricultural exports and other things. They're going to take a while, and now we have the coronavirus, which is really slowing down the Chinese economy for now. I mean, basically, they've put barriers. I mean, the whole country's almost quarantined
can
in
they
a way
even
in terms
buy
of trade.
all of the products, especially
No,
agricultural
right.
products they said they would?
Right. But Trump has a deal. So, as with so many things, will voters follow up and care about the details, or is it good enough for them that Trump said he made a deal and they'll buy it?
You know, I know you like Oxford Economics, and we have one of their latest.
Well, they do good
reports
analysis, yeah.
And one of them was that, when you look at what voters may be looking at as they head to the polls, the economy is not number one. In fact, I think healthcare is at the top, if not number one. But on the point of the economy, given that we're Yahoo Finance, we have record unemployment, we have low inflation, we have an economy that continues to grow, although not gangbusters. Is that enough for victory, or, according to this Oxford Economics report, does it really hinge on voter turnout?
Yeah. Oxford Economics is a forecasting firm. There are many others like them, such as Moody's Analytics and Capital Economics and others. And basically what they do is they have these models, and they look at election results from the past, combined with a bunch of economic indicators to figure out the correlations between the state of the economy and a president's re-election odds. So what Oxford many of these forecasting firms have said, it actually looks pretty good for Trump based on what the models show. And, in plain English, when the economy is pretty good and a Republican of either a president of either party is trying to get reelected, normally he does. And it is always a he. We've never had a she president, so that pronoun is appropriate in that case. So right now we have decent economic growth. It's not great, but its last figure was 2.3% growth for 2020. The unemployment rate does remain at a 50-year low, and this all looks generally good for President Trump, according to historical models. But as we know, Trump is not a normal president, and because of these issues we're talking about, because of his divisiveness, because of the way he polarizes voters, because of the scandals that we've seen in the administration, because of impeachment, Trump may need an additional edge. And so Oxford Economics is saying, if this election goes the way prior elections have gone in general, yes, Trump will win re-election, but huge caveat, if there's strong or higher than average Democratic turnout for whoever their nominee is, it doesn't look good for Trump. And here's what they say in their conclusion for now. A modest rise in Democratic voter turnout would give the Democratic contender a large win.
Wow,
so they're
modest
saying,
rise
so
means
they're
large
saying,
win.
so what counts as a rise in Democratic turnout? So they're saying that there was pretty strong Democratic turnout in 2004 and 2008. So based on those levels of voting, if that's the Democratic turnout in 2020, they're saying the Electoral College outcome is going to be 347 for the Democrat and just 191 for Trump. That will be a walloping. Now, is it going to happen? Who knows? 9 months to go. Think about all the things that could happen. More revelations about stuff Trump might have done.
Or a mild recession. Would a mild
We still have
recession
time. We
be
do have
enough?
time for a mild recession to begin. And by the way, when you think about how recessions begin, you don't know it. When a recession starts,
Sadly,
you don't know it.
You look in
you
the
don't
rear
know
view
it.
and you go, oh, we're in a recession.
That's right. You only know a recession started when you've got it way later. I mean, it could be it take a year to realize, oh yeah, we actually had GDP growth declining in those 2 quarters, and it seems to fulfill what we think a recession looks like. But people kind of know something's not right. So if you start to have layoffs, and it's not just, to my mind, it's not just sort of a lower number in job gains for a given month. So we've been averaging, I think, under Trump around 180,000 new jobs per month. That's a good number. It's a little bit lower than Obama, but that's probably because so many workers have been absorbed into the labor force. It's hard to find new people to hire. 180,000 new jobs a month is totally solid, perfectly fine. We'll keep the unemployment rate low for sure. But if you start to have layoffs above average and people start to know there are layoffs, and they, to my mind, one layoff has a major multiplier effect, because a lot of people know. If it's somebody in your family, if your uncle got laid off, and the place where he works actually laid off 10 people, wow, you haven't heard about that in a while. People are getting laid off, and you hear about a couple people getting laid off in different areas or different industries, and you start to think to yourself, I better hunker down.
It's a confidence. You're chipping away at confidence, consumer confidence.
Yeah, plus you've got us in the media. We've been chirping about a recession for like the last 4 years. I'm guilty, along with others.
Although I have to tell you, a lot of the economists I'm talking to on the shows, on our Yahoo Finance shows, say no recession in sight, at least for 2020, even with the coronavirus threat.
They are. I mean, think about what happened last year. We had the yield curve inversion, which is not a 100% recession indicator, but a pretty good indicator. And I mean, I have people writing in, you chicken little, why are you always saying there's going to be a Trump recession? I'm not always saying that, but I was talking about it last summer, like we all were, because the economists were talking about it, because this major indicator had shifted, and there were some other things going on at the time. So it doesn't look like we're going to have a yield curve. Yes, that's right.
Which is a big part of Trump's base.
It still is, actually.
It is.
And it's not a terrible recession. It's it's kind of like what you would call a technical recession, which is that the data shows that it has been shrinking slightly. I mean, a lot of people working in manufacturing, they feel fine. They're not seeing layoffs. People are making money. They feel pretty secure in their jobs. But these things could turn, it wouldn't take a huge turn, especially when we're only at 2.3% economic growth.
Something we didn't talk about at all is Mike Bloomberg, who's not part of these 4 primary
I think we're going to be
elections.
talking more about Mike Bloomberg.
You think so?
I do.
So he's really going to jump in here, I guess, depending on the results of these early races. He's planning to jump in on Super Tuesday in March.
Yeah, and that's where he's spending. So we're hearing about all this money he's spending. Running ads and building campaign staff. We haven't seen really many of those ads here in New York, except the occasional national one. But he's spending all that money in those Super Tuesday states and some of the later states.
Spent on the Super Bowl, as did the Trump administration.
Right, and that was a mere $11 million for him. He has already spent more than $200 million. I mean, I think Bloomberg is a wild card. So when we talk about what could change the nature of this race, And by the way, whatever the outcome in Iowa, so we're talking about this when we still don't know the outcome in Iowa, we will at some point. But the outcome, because has been such a mess, the Iowa outcome matters a lot less than it would have if it had been a clean outcome on the night of the votes.
You could argue that whoever doesn't do well in this Iowa caucus gets a pass.
You really could, and it does look as if that might be Joe Biden. But Bloomberg gets the biggest boost of all because he blew off Iowa. He said, I don't care about Iowa. I don't think it really matters that much. And I think he's turning out to have been right.
And Trump tweeted right away and called it a mitigated disaster.
Yeah. Well,
so you could say that Trump and Bloomberg were both winners.
You know, all the candidates have moved on. Nobody's in Iowa anymore except the people who had late flights out, or I guess there are a few poor people who have to hang around and find out what the actual results are.
Make sure those results are accurate.
All the political people have moved on because you got to move fast here. I think assuming all the other Democratic primary elections go smoothly, which they pretty much always have in the past, I don't think this is going to matter in the election.
Just an embarrassing splotch on
the one
the
way
Democratic
it might
Party.
matter, and this actually is important, is there's been some modest pressure on Iowa from the parties and from various political operatives to end this weird caucus system where you have to show up at 7 p.m. and then you have to spend a few hours standing in one corner for your candidate, then you go and stand in another corner if your candidate doesn't hit the threshold. And by the way, everybody knows who everybody's voting for. There's no secret ballot. There's been some modest pressure on Iowa to end that system and just have a regular vote. And now that might actually happen. It seems
We'll
like
just have to see if they implement technology going forward, because this round
even
didn't seem to work
even
out.
if the technology worked perfectly, it's a weird system.
Yeah.
Hardly anybody understands it.
A lot of people agree with you.
And it disenfranchises people. I mean, if you don't have 3 hours to go to a caucus, I mean, you're a working
not voting.
mom.
I couldn't spend
You got
3
nothing to
hours
do on
there.
Monday night?
I would much prefer an app or to be able to do it on my phone. And
Well, even if you just drop by.
sure,
I mean,
I can do that.
In almost every place else, it literally takes 5 minutes to go in, vote,
No,
put your
it is a
ballot in or however it
process
works.
in Iowa, and I think this may be the very beginning of them having to.
So that could
rethink
be a
it.
very interesting takeaway from the 2020 election when it's over. But everyone's going to forget about Iowa until probably mid 2023.
What do you mean mid 2023?
Everybody leaves Iowa. No one thinks about Iowa. Actually,
Oh,
Iowa.
you mean the candidates?
Yeah, the candidates.
Okay, I thought you meant America as a whole.
No, I do mean America as a whole. Forget about Iowa. It doesn't
right,
matter.
well-
So actually, Iowa is a swing state, so Iowa does
They
matter in the general
absolutely
election.
do,
It's
absolutely
not
do.
a lot of votes, but it does matter.
Look, things are tenuous, I think we can say safely, throughout the next few months as we get closer to the election. Lots more to talk about. We'll continue the conversation, but for now, we're going to leave it there. Thank you all for joining us and for listening. Be sure to follow me at Alexis TV News,
And me at Rick J. Newman.
and we'll see you next time.